I've had some much better luck with Esther. Got a bit of wood in the back of Maud at the moment. She's on van duties.
The main objective today was to fit this shelf, and let me bring you up to speed with what's been going on with the cars. Me and my beautiful girlfriend came around here the other day, gloss black with a brush. That's good enough. Rust is coming back through, so oil pressure switch is kaput, basically failed.
Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and I think I've just about got over the utter fail that was the last video. If you haven't seen the last video, definitely go and check it out. It was supposed to be my video at the Ford show at Santa Pod, but I snapped my memory card and lost all the footage. But I was able to show you guys my run down the quarter mile in this car, Maud, my Mk1 Escort, and I actually did a personal best time for this car and for myself on that day. So yeah, definitely go and watch that video if you haven't already. Now since then, I've been round to the garage where I store my other Mk1 Escort that I like to call Heidi, and Esther, my Mk1 Escort, and I've been fiddling about with a couple of things in between the bad weather, tidying up the garages, stuff like that. I've also spent a bit of time on Heidi, and I've had some much better luck with Esther. So today I'm heading round to those garages. You can probably see I've got a bit of wood in the back of Maud at the moment. She's on van duties. The wood just about fits, although I've had to tie the boot lid down, so it doesn't actually fit, but we're making it work. So yeah, I'm hoping to put another shelf up in Heidi's garage, as long as it doesn't rain today. The rain has been on and off because I need to pull Heidi out of her garage to be able to put that shelf up. But yeah, other than that, I'm going to give you an update on everything that's happened since the last video, and yeah, hopefully make a little bit more progress on Esther, but we'll see how it goes. So I'll catch up with you when I get to the garages.
Well, the weather has stayed nice around here today, thankfully, and I've got all three Escorts out in the sunshine. I'll bring you up to speed with what's been happening with these two in a minute, but first, let me show you what I've been up to inside the garage. So the main objective today was to fit this shelf in place of the one that was already there. This one's basically a lot wider than the other one. Over this side, I had a really narrow shelf, and from here onwards, it was probably only coming out to about here. So yeah, with this wider shelf, it gives me way more room, and all the stuff that was on that shelf, it's a random bunch of stuff, you know, stuff that I forget I've already got and then buy more of. So I really think tidying that one shelf up is going to make a massive difference in terms of being able to find stuff and keeping it tidy in here and making use of the limited space that I've got. So this area was jam-packed. I did find a couple of empty cans that I've thrown away, and you know, I've moved some stuff around, but yeah, there's literally loads of room. This shelf is not being fully utilised at all, and what I plan to do is actually get some boxes to put the stuff in and then put the boxes on the shelf. This piece of wood that I've used for this shelf was a little bit wider than I wanted. Basically, I didn't want this sticking out any further than all this stuff that's already here, because sometimes I do sort of, you know, go down the side of the car. So if this was hanging over here, I'd have to sort of duck down and squeeze down the side of the car. And I used an interesting method to actually cut this down. There's the bit that I cut off. This shelf, that's another little shelf that I've hung today. I'll probably put brake cleaner and stuff here as well. You know, these type of bits don't need to be in boxes, so there's a dedicated shelf for those bits. I've also put another little shelf over here just to put things like hand cleaner, gloves. You know, these things just get chucked in places. I've got this barrier cream, which it's always hidden away, and I forget that I've got it. And you know, if you use barrier cream, it's so much easier to clean your hands. So yeah, another little shelf just to hold little bits like this. This shelf was actually a nightmare because when I've tried to fit it, I did try and do it like I've done this one, you know, with a sort of bit of wood there. But yeah, it just wasn't stable. But then I found some more proper shelf brackets. So anyway, that's enough with me struggling to do simple tasks. And let me bring you up to speed with what's been going on with the cars. Alright, so as you can see, Heidi is now back on all fours. Me and my beautiful girlfriend came around here the other day and refitted her front suspension, which means it's going to be easier to roll her in and out of the garage. And we also refitted the bonnet, and basically she can stay together like this now until she goes somewhere to get the engine bay painted. And yeah, as soon as I get inside the boot in the same state that the engine bay is, that can happen. So yeah, all the front suspension and cross member and stuff were all still together. I had a different cross member fitted when I was lowering her down onto a trolley and stuff. And the underside of the front of the chassis rails is now painted gloss black. I've hit it with red oxide first, then 2-pack primer, and then gloss black with a brush. That's good enough. And yeah, the same the other side, and all this sort of where I've gone too far, that'll get sanded down, and then it will just be beige from here upwards. I just wanted to get a nice protective layer on the underside of the chassis legs. There was no need to wait to do that because yeah, that was going to be black. Because it's the underside of the chassis legs, I'm not bothered that it's done in a brush. The underside of this car isn't going to be stripped and painted body colour. You know, some sort of coating has been put on it by the previous owner, Daniel, and you know, no rust or anything has come through, so I'm guessing it's been done relatively well, because yeah, that was done, I mean, I've had the car over a year. I think Daniel did it a year before he sold it, so you know, it's been a couple of years. And yeah, I don't want to be scared to drive this car in all weathers and stuff. It's not going to be a concours show car, but I do want it to look nice. Now, when I was working on Esther in the rain, the front of this car did get a bit wet, and there is a couple of little bits, you know, where rust is coming back through. So, you know, those bits will have to get tickled and cure rusted and, you know, re-epoxy primered before it goes to paint. But yeah, that's not a massive deal. So now I want to talk you through some bits on Esther, which I actually did mention when I was filming the video before last, when I failed to get her ready for the Ford show. And yeah, more stuff started going wrong, so I decided to scrap that. And yeah, I'll explain everything now, and then I'll talk you through some more positive bits that I've figured out on this car. Alright, so nothing's changed in Esther's engine bay since the video before last. But the day before I filmed the video before last, I spent some time off camera on Esther's wiring loom. Mainly in her cockpit, but in the engine bay, I've now added a little spade terminal to this wire, which is the temperature gauge sender wire, and that's now plugged into the temperature gauge sender that came with the kit with my clocks, so that I'll be able to see how hot the engine is on the new dash. And following advice from loads of you guys, I've now added a grommet here and one down there on the inner wing for the wires for the speed sensor, which is obviously going to be running the speedo on the new dash. And the orange and green wire going through here is actually for the oil pressure switch. Now, the oil pressure gauge switch is the orange wire, and that's now hooked up to that oil pressure gauge. And then this green one I will be hooking up to an oil pressure switch, which will be for the oil pressure light. But at the moment, I've just got a bung in the end of that T-piece where that oil pressure light switch will go. Now, one thing I have realised is that this oil pressure switch is kaput. Basically, this little fitting where the wire hooks up to, it wobbles, and when you wiggle that, it basically changes the reading on the gauge on the dash. So I don't know if maybe I'll be able to put like a blob of some sort of glue on it just to hold it in one place so that it's, you know, where it needs to be. Basically, where it's wiggling, it's obviously earthing out somewhere on the body of the switch and causing it not to work properly. Essentially, I need a new one of those oil pressure switches, but I am going to try and bodge it. But yeah, still plenty of stuff to put back together in this engine bay. Still need to put the trumpets on, etc, etc. But let me show you what's been going on inside her cockpit. Now, what I wanted to show you at the end of the video before last was the new dash working properly. It was going to be a little bit of positivity at the end of a very negative video, but I then started having issues with the dash. But we'll talk about that in a minute. As I say, I have spent some time off camera on the wiring loom in here. I know it's a mess, but it's fine. A lot of people get in touch with me saying that my messy wiring loom is going to cause fires. How messy your wiring loom looks is nothing to do with fires. If there's no wires touching each other that shouldn't be, then it won't cause fires. But anyway, one thing that was in the original 6 style dash, which is actually here, but is not going to be in this dash anymore, is the fuel gauge. So I've lengthened the wire for the fuel gauge. It should be this purple one, I think. So yeah, that's the fuel gauge wire. I'm actually going to mount a VDO fuel gauge in the center switch panel. The cigarette lighter wires needed lengthening as well. They were barely long enough. But yeah, other than that, nothing's really changed. It will all get tucked back up, obviously, where it needs to go. Obviously, I've got my extension fitted now for the dash. So, plenty of slack on the dash wires. Over here, we've got the speed sensor wires, which are now able to plug into the dash. I've added the multi-plug onto the end of those, and they plug into the multi-plug that already came on the dash clocks. And we've also got that green and orange wire coming through for the oil pressure switches. And yeah, they're all wired up this end. But as I just mentioned, the one for the light isn't wired up the other end. Now, when I filmed the footage to show this working before, it all worked properly, and it does now. I've just wired up the battery. So if we put the key on, you'll see we've got the red alternator light. If we do the indicators, that works. We've got the flasher, that works. If I flick the headlight switch on, you'll see that the clocks light up. One thing I've actually worked out is on the back of these 2 clocks, which, as you can see, have a white light in them instead of a green light like these 2, there's rubber bungs. Actually, I can show you now. This has just fell out, and this isn't screwed in, see? But yeah, behind these rubber bungs is access to the bulbs. So literally, I've just got to get some green bulbs, and you've got the same there. And then I'll be able to have green dials, or maybe I'll change them all to blue. Let me know what you think. Obviously, with them being Race Tech, the logo is green, so I think green might be the way to go. But yeah, interested to hear your opinions. But yeah, you can see the multi-plug there for the speed sensor that I mentioned. But yeah, basically, the dash all works now, but when I was trying to show it before, it all stopped working. Balance that there for now. Let's switch this off. And basically what had happened, what I didn't realise at the time when I was stressing about Esther not being ready, was that a couple of the wires on this extension that I made basically failed. So I just had to make up a couple more wires, put the ends on them, and fingers crossed, they've all stayed in there fine now. So yeah, where I was sort of stressing that there might be something wrong with the clocks or whatever, it literally was a case of just redoing a couple of those wires in my extension that I made. Let's turn the headlights off. Now you'll see these sort of extra wires that hang down. I think I mentioned before, these are all to program the dash. I need to program the speedo and stuff like that. I'll worry about that another day. But when I was round here with Kat, when the car was jacked up, I did spin the driver's side front wheel, and it did make the speedo move. So the sensor's working, which is a good thing. Another thing I can show you actually, if I turn that back on, is if I touch this green wire to earth, which will of course be attached to the oil pressure light switch, you'll see that the oil pressure light does work. Just take that back off. And yeah, everything in the dash does appear to work. The oil pressure is going all the way up. When I wiggle that loose fitting on the oil pressure switch, you'll see that oil pressure gauge starts to vary. So yeah, there's clearly something going on there. Now, if you watched the video before last, you'll know that I had a nightmare trying to fit the slave cylinder to this car, and then I sort of remembered that one of the threads on the bell housing where the slave cylinder mounts to was cross-threaded. Really should have tapped that while the gearbox was off. And this gearbox, which is the one that was fitted before I took her apart, it whined, and I always kind of assumed that the input shaft bearing was worn. And then when I sort of found that the spigot bearing might not have been protruding enough for the input shaft to, you know, be resting inside it, I then thought, well, maybe that has caused the input shaft bearing to be worn. Obviously, I found the issue with the clutch and stuff, but part of me thought that I was gonna, you know, have to fit this gearbox and then maybe end up taking it back out and fitting the other one I've got, or maybe even sourcing another one, which shouldn't be a problem now that I've enlarged the tunnel. But when I started this thing up the other day, I found that there's no noise at all coming from that bearing. Now the slave cylinder is still, you know, sort of half fitted as it was, you know, when I left this car before. One thing worth mentioning, there's no coolant in it, which means the ECU is going to think the engine's really cold and throw a load of extra fuel in. Also, the VVT isn't plugged in. The spark plug cover is fitted and the wire isn't plugged in. So it will struggle to start a bit, but it does start. Got to keep my hand on the accelerator for a bit, clear it out. So yeah, that's a bit better, but you know, it's not right. But as you would have seen, the alternator light goes out as it should, which is good. And I don't know if that's picking up on the camera, there's no whining from the gearbox, you know. It made a really bad whine before, and then when you press the clutch it would go away. And I can press the clutch because the slave cylinder is kind of fitted, and there's no change to the sort of tone, you know, so there's definitely no whine in there that goes away when you press the pedal. The revs do increase when you press the pedal. I'm guessing that's because there's sort of less load on the engine when you press the clutch. I don't know, but yeah, we'll turn it off because there's no coolant in it, so I don't want to run it for too long. But yeah, really happy to see that this gearbox actually seems fine. And I'm actually thinking, if I can somehow lower the gearbox down and re-tap that thread, I might actually not have to take the gearbox off after all, which will be really cool. But yeah, we'll have to see. I'm gonna dive into that probably next when I come back round here. Other than that, obviously need to put the interior back together, properly mount the new clocks, put the wiring loom back up. I'm going to refit the heater box, even though I haven't actually got around to buying a new heater matrix for it. There is a company out there that does one that's sort of specially made for Z-Tech conversions. And basically where the heater pipes come through the bulkhead here, they're sort of, you know, cut flush with the bulkhead. They've also got a little barb on them, and they're at a different angle, so they're more ideal to fit with a Z-Tech conversion. But I can't for the life of me remember which company supplies those special heater matrices. So, you know, if anyone from that company is watching, or if any of you guys know what company does supply those, yeah, do get in touch and let us know. But yeah, I think I will refit the heater box for now, because even though I can't plumb the coolant through it because the matrix leaks, I think when we take this thing to Northern Ireland, it would be better to have some sort of heater. And I think when that hole isn't blocked up by the heater, you might end up getting a bit of a draft in here. But yeah, need to fit the heater box, fit the switch panel, refit the fire extinguisher, etc, etc, and then the interior will be back together and looking nice again with the new clocks. And yeah, I'm excited to learn about how to program those as well. So yeah, there's definitely a chance that in the next video I should have this thing back together and back on the road, although there are quite a few other bits I want to get done before we take this thing to Northern Ireland for the Summit Show and Run. But before I get out of here today, there is something I want to have a look at. Alright, so one thing that hasn't been fitted to this car since before I was on YouTube, to be honest, is her strut brace. So this basically mounts to the two strut tops, you know, using these brackets. Still need to fit the bracket the other side, and it basically just adds a bit of rigidity, you know, keeps your inner wings more rigid, stops them sort of, you know, separating when you're cornering fast and that sort of thing. But I found when I fitted the ST170 engine that basically the bar wouldn't fit. Now this bracket here is one of the ones that Chris Kember at Clump Fab made me. Massive thanks and a shout out to you if you're watching. These are the brackets that came with the strut brace, and they were fine when Esther had a Pinto years ago. But yeah, Chris made me two sets where these holes are higher up. This is the same as the one that's fitted to the car, and then we've got these ones where the holes are even higher up. And it looks like the ones that I've got fitted might just about work. it is only going to be just. Now I can't be bothered to fit the other one now, because whichever brackets I do decide to use, I want to get them zinc plated. I think I'm going to get both sets zinc plated. All right, so I decided to drill these holes out a bit on all of these brackets, because I noticed when this one was fitted, this bolt needed to be sort of angled up. So yeah, this hole needed to be sort of elongated down. But rather than elongating the holes, I just went through with a big drill bit. Now I still need to, first of all, get rid of all the swarf around this hole. But just in general, tidy these up, because, you know, any scratches or, you know, there's a little bit of welding splatter in places. But yeah, anything I leave on there will still be there when it's plated. It will just be shiny. So yeah, I'm going to take these home. I'm going to take a file home with me as well, and some sandpaper. I did start having a go at messing around with one of these. Like you can see, I'm just going to file all the edges, make sure they're not sharp. Obviously the underside doesn't have to be smooth, but yeah, I'm going to try and file away some of this splatter and then just sand them and get them as smooth as I can, and then I'll give them to my plater and they'll come back lovely and silver. Now there is a couple of other bits I want my plater to do, because he's got a proper polishing machine, so I'm going to get him to polish this back up so it's, you know, mirror polished. He'd done it for me before and it came up really good. But also I'll get him to do Esther's alloy washer bottle. I did try and sort of sand some of the scratches out of this and try and polish it with a thing on a drill, but yeah, I didn't really get very far. And I did sort of have a go at the radiator as well. This was really bad. It had loads of marks on it just from, you know, fitting it and removing it over the years and knocking it. So it does look better than it did, but yeah, maybe I'll take the radiator out and take that to him as well. But if not, I'll try and get the rad looking a little bit better than it does now. The day is fast disappearing. The sun has now gone down behind the houses. But yeah, I love it when I get all three of my Escorts out together. Such an awesome sight. I'm very lucky to own 3 old school Escorts, although they do keep me poor. Anyway, I'm going to tidy up round here and rag moored home. Alright, so I'm feeling a whole lot better about getting Esther back on the road now that I know that gearbox issues and dash issues aren't as bad as I thought. One thing I did forget to mention, it appears that when I kind of set fire to the ECU wiring, that didn't do any damage because the engine still runs. Obviously I haven't plugged in the VVT and I haven't had any coolant in it, so I don't really know if the VVT wiring and the coolant temperature sensor wiring are okay, but it seems like it's okay. The outer sheath on that ECU wiring is really tough and the fire didn't penetrate it. Now don't forget, if you're in the market for an ECU, I am a dealer of Motorsport Electronics ECUs, so if you need any advice in terms of which one you should choose for your setup, just drop me an email. My email address is always in the description, and check out the range of ECUs that I've got for sale on my website at marcushayesuk.com. Also, if you want to fit some race tech gauges to your car, like I've got fitted to Esther, they are now available to order through my website as well. Now in the next couple of days, I will be going back round to the garage to crack on with Esther, and now I've brought you guys up to date with everything that's been going on behind the scenes. You can see that yeah, things are a lot more positive than they have been in the last couple of videos. So that's all I've got for this video. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new. Check out my website for merch and parts. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Massive, massive thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. I'll leave all the links to all of that in the description, along with my email address for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, from me and my beautiful girlfriend Kat, thanks for watching.